alienation, life negation. That's not going to go. But Hegel's view of that is going to be generally, that's abstract. That's religion that understands the other to be transcendent. I mean, we will look at this if any of you do the aesthetics next term. You can't not do bits of the philosophy of religion. So, all right, I'm going to let you have just a few more minutes. I do want to get into being nothing becoming. So, if there are any further questions on just the general project? Yes, please go ahead.
So a question I had in terms of mediation and immediacy. Mm-hmm. So basically, mediation gets us up to the basically start of the project, yes. But it's then thrown away. It's almost sort of set aside.
Yes, that's right. It has to be set aside.
So you're going through like the phenomenology of your sort of radical skepticism. That's really one of my presuppositions. But as soon as you start, you've forgotten that mediation.
Well, you have to bracket it. So I suppose the thing is that if you go through a process of reflection and abstraction, then what we then need to focus on is the result. What it is that has emerged through that process of abstraction, not on the fact of its having been produced by that process of abstraction. Now, this is quite important because what Hegel would regard as philosophers of reflection can't help themselves. It's their instinct. But surely that you've got to think about the process. Whether it is Schelling who wants to think about the activity of the subject that moves Hegel's thinking, or Nietzsche's genealogy. What is it other than a tracing of the process through which certain values emerge? Or Heidegger, or Deleuze, looking at the deep structures of difference which produce that whole movement of taking X and looking back at the origin, what produced, the conditions, the ground, even if the ground is an unground, as it is sort of for Schelling and Heidegger. That is reflexive philosophy par excellence. It can't focus on the simple. It can't look at the simple because all it can ever think is the simple is mediated. Let's look at the mediating structure. And Hegel's saying, no, to begin, I know that the simple is mediated. We know that. But what is it to be simple? Not to be simple as mediated, but to be simply simple. Now, it might turn out, in fact, it does turn out, that means nothing at all. But it's the vanishing of being to nothing. So it means a little bit more than nothing, it means becoming. So you discover. And of course, mediation comes in. But yes, you're right. It's sort of, so I suppose, and I find this in conversations, that often what makes it hard to talk about Hegel's logic is that the critics won't even let it begin, because they've always already decided that the beginning is impossible. Because they always already know that the beginning is mediated, as if Hegel denied it. And that's it, end of story. And however complicated our discussions get, it always comes back to that. And I suppose what's interesting about Hegel is he's saying, this process gets you here. Think what it is to be simple. I mean, the way I like to put it sometimes, if you ever got someone denying something, like atheists denying God, what is the God that you're denying exactly? And has anyone ever believed in it anyway? Similarly, if you deny immediacy in the name of mediation, well, what is immediacy exactly? What is it such that you don't believe in it? You can actually, if you want to, approach the logic like that. Let's say you don't believe in being. You think it's a fiction. Okay, well, what is it? What is it you don't believe in? And have you taken what it is you don't believe in its simplest form? Or are you subtly understanding it to be object, absolute, substance? In which case you're not taking being as that which you don't believe in, because you're not thinking being. But you're absolutely right. Yes, it does involve this element of abstraction. And as I say, that kind of means that doing the logic, you've got to sort of have a split brain, in a way. You've got to be rooted in the world and know that you're using language and know that you're in a history and know that the French Revolution happened and so on. And yet also think this stuff too. Yeah, a quick one because we're already at half past.
I was just going to say, what if you, when you deny being or whatever, you don't think it's something that you're denying? It's just nonsense. It's and I mean that technically.
So you're not thinking being, you're thinking nonsense.
Well, no, you just don't even know what it is you're supposed to be thinking that you can't think, but it doesn't exist. So what?
Right. Okay. But then I don't know what it is you're saying when you're saying there is no such thing as being. No such thing as what?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, then but then that you see that takes away the power of what it. Then there is no thrust to the claim. There is no immediacy. There is no being.
Whatever you think is playing this role here, it doesn't make sense. That's what it's saying.
Right. Well, first of all, the question assumes it knows already what it is that we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's question begging. And also, you are subtly substituting a different idea for being. Nonsense. Nonsense, we know what nonsense is. Nonsense has a sense. We know exactly what it is. And being isn't nonsense. Being may prove to be nonsense, but as such, as a thought, it's a different thought. Okay. There is a table, there is a bottle on the table. They're nonsense? No, I can't even use it in that way. They are different thoughts. So that's not going to work. Anyway, let's move on. Although in another sense, of course, pure being proves to be nothing whatsoever, as you know. All right, I just want to summarize, just sort of put it all together. There are various reasons why philosophy should begin with pure being for Hegel, and here are several of them. It's required by what Hegel takes to be a properly critical, skeptical, non-question begging approach to philosophy. I think that's really important. Yep. If there's a categorical imperative motivating Hegel's thinking, it is thou shalt not beg the question, thou shalt not take for granted. Secondly, modern freedom. Modern freedom requires it because for Hegel at the beginning, freedom requires beginning from no determined assumption. Thirdly, the collapse at the end of the phenomenology requires beginning of being. And fourthly, the very nature of beginning requires beginning with being. So all of these things are working together. And when you're reading through Hegel, bear in mind that there are these different forces, as it were, moving us in the direction of being. Also bear in mind, by the way, that being, despite Hegel's wording, isn't the foundation or the ground of what is to come. It's the beginning. All right. Now, let's go into the section being, nothing, becoming. You'll either find this blindingly simple, blindingly obvious. Why do people spend such a long time over it? Or it might be a little bit troubling. I mean, in a sense, you might begin with the latter and get to the former. I don't know. So Hegel's beginning with pure indeterminate being. And let me just say, by the way, that although Hegel argues at times that the concepts he's deriving match various historical positions, you've got to be a bit careful with that. So the obvious thought would be that Hegel's pure being matches the being of Parmenides. I don't think that's quite true, in that I think that Hegel's being is even more indeterminate than Parmenides. And you can see this by looking at the way that Parmenides presents being. He always presents it in contrast to nothing. I mean, he also builds in thoughts like necessity and limit to it and so on. But being can be thought, in fact, it's all that can be thought, and that's contrasted with nothing. And it seems to me, from that point of view, Parmenides is already beginning with that opposition. Hegel isn't. We begin with pure, immediate, indeterminate being. And the argument is that by virtue of its utter indeterminacy, such being immediately proves to be nothing at all. As sheer being, it is so utterly indeterminate that it's nothing at all. And so it vanishes, to use Fichte's phrase, before our very eyes. It's so indeterminate that there's nothing there. No being. So this is Hegel's way of putting this. Being. This is page 82, and you can find it in the G-Money, 59. It's the being, pure being, without any further determination. And as I said, read that carefully. That does not mean being is to be defined as lacking determination. Obviously not, because then being would be defined as not determinate. So it would be determinate. So it wouldn't be indeterminate. Being is not defined here at all. Being, pure being, stop. No further determination. Don't think anything further. That's all you've got. In its indeterminate immediacy, it's equal only to itself. It's also not unequal relatively to another. It has no diversity within itself, nor any with a reference outwards. And I said, as I said last time, don't think of that as the explicit exclusion of diversity, but just as noting the lack of diversity in being. Being would not be held fast in its purity if it contained any determination or content which could be distinguished in it, or by which it could be distinguished from another. Note that phrase, held fast in its purity. That's the moment of activity that is required at the beginning to hold presuppositions at bay. And so going back to the question that came before, pure being has to be thought by a pure knowing that holds being in its purity. It is pure indeterminateness and emptiness. There is nothing to be intuited in it, or if one can speak here of intuiting. Or it is only this pure intuiting itself. Just as little is anything to be thought in it, or it is equally only this empty thinking. Being, the indeterminate immediate, is in fact nothing, and neither more nor less than nothing. Now, Hegel's claim can't just be that we regard being as nothing. But it must be that being's own indeterminacy turns it into nothing. Being itself, as we hold it fast, is so indeterminate that it's not even the being that it is. It's nothing at all. If it was simply a matter of our regarding being as nothing, then this would be phenomenology, not logic. And there are people who read it like that. Okay, Hegel understands being to be utterly indeterminate, but where there is no determinacy, we normally say there's nothing, ergo, we call this nothing. Fine. There hasn't really been a change, there's been no vanishing. You just have something that, in our experience, we regard as nothing. That's not what Hegel's saying. For a start, that would be phenomenology, it wouldn't be logic. And secondly, it wouldn't capture the idea that Hegel's got here. The idea he's getting at here is that being itself is utterly and radically indeterminate, and as so indeterminate. It proves to be nothing at all, not in reference to any expectations that we might have, but simply in its own terms. It's so indeterminate, there's nothing to distinguish it as pure being. Now, Hegel has, later in the text, a really interesting way of putting this, which is on page 99. It's 74 in the Judgement. And I've referred to this in my book, but it's not one that gets looked at very often. It's page 99, end of the first paragraph there. And it's, as I say, I've got down here page 74 in the Judgement. The paragraph begins, but this is found immediately in them. They are as Jacobi describes them, blah, blah, blah. And it's the end I want to look at, where he says, or it can be expressed thus, because being is devoid of all determination whatever, it is not the affirmative determinateness which it is. It is not being, but nothing. Now that determinateness really should be in scare quotes. Being is so indeterminate, it's not what it is. It's not even distinguished as being. It vanishes. And for the minute, remember, suppress your, oh, but surely, no, it can't be. Just lock them away somewhere and just try and think what Hegel's trying to think here. And try and put yourself in Hegel's position. And so what Hegel's trying to think here is not a simple move in our heads from something that we name being to the very same thing we name nothing. He's thinking something he considers to be a vanishing. We think being, and by virtue of its utter indeterminacy, it dissolves in front of our very eyes. It's nothing at all. It vanishes. But then, of course, that vanishing is what that being is. So in fact, there's something artificial about going from being, pause, nothing, pause, to becoming. The moment you think being, in its indeterminacy, it vanishes before your eyes, and as such proves to be its own vanishing, which is already becoming. And so being proves to be becoming. Okay, let's move on so you've got the whole picture, and then I want to say quite a lot before we sort of come back and think about that. So thought is left with nothing at this point. Not nonsense, but nothing. This is the second paragraph. This is not some limited nothing. It's not just non-being. It's absolute radical nothing. Nothing that nuffs as much as anything Heidegger could possibly think. This is sheer, absolute, immediate nothing. But by virtue of being sheer nothing, pure nothing, it has an immediacy as that. It is precisely nothing. And so it, in having an immediacy of its own, proves to be pure being. Utterly empty being, but not just nothing, precisely because it is purely nothing. Nothing proves to be being because of its immediacy. Being proves to be nothing because of its indeterminacy. So it's not the same. Okay? Pure being is so utterly indeterminate, so utterly empty and vacuous, it's nothing. Pure nothing is so purely and sheerly nothing that it's immediately that, so it's being. Which is so utterly indeterminate that it's nothing, which is so immediate. And so in fact, the two of them are a restless movement that allows thought to settle in neither, which Hegel calls becoming, which is the next paragraph. Pure being and pure nothing are therefore the same. What is the truth is neither being nor nothing, but the being does not pass over, but has passed over into nothing and nothing into being. Be careful with that. He doesn't mean that, as you can see from what he says elsewhere. The point is that the passing over is so immediate. It's not that it doesn't happen. In fact, he undermines the claim 3 lines down. You can see with the italicized word vanishing. But it is immediate. But it is equally true that they're not undistinguished from each other, and that on the contrary, they're not the same. They are absolutely distinct. And yet that they are unseparated and inseparable, and that each immediately vanishes in its opposite. In sein Gegenteil verschwinden. And that idea of verschwinden is crucial. The truth is therefore this movement of the immediate vanishing of the one in the other, becoming. A movement in which both are distinguished but by a difference which has immediately resolved itself. Okay, so the number of things to say here. First of all, as I said before, Hegel's being, I think, is more radically pure and indeterminate than Parmenides. Parmenides' being is settled. It's determinate because it's being, not nothing. Not the nothing that couldn't possibly be anyway. But of course, Parmenides gets into those difficulties, but he has a settled... So, from Hegel's point of view, Parmenides is already beginning with a determinate conception of being. But being is not a fiction. So Hegel's not Nietzsche. Being is not nonsense, it's not a fiction. It must be thought. At the beginning, it is. In fact, it's all we've got. But pure being doesn't sustain itself. It vanishes, and it proves to be that vanishing. Now, if this is metaphysics, then we've already got our first metaphysical proposition, that being is becoming. Heraclitus was right. But bizarrely, he was right because an extreme version of Parmenides was right. it's not that becoming displaces being. Being, thought in its indeterminate immediacy, is becoming. And what's more, nothing is becoming too. Now, obviously there's the famous Leibnizian question picked up by Schelling, why is there something rather than nothing? Well, we don't know yet. But we know why there is becoming rather than nothing, because pure nothing itself would be becoming, is becoming. Okay, now I'm going to go through a whole set of things to say about this that I'm not sure they're in any particular order. I'm sorry about that. It's just thoughts. I've got to say that, I've got to say that, I've got to say that. First of all, some of this will be obvious, and I apologise if you think we know that, if it's too banal, but I want to say it anyway. First of all, this is a logical process. Okay, this is not a process in time. So this is not Hegel's version of the Big Bang. This is a logical process which thinks what it is to be. First point. Secondly, note being and nothing are immediately different. Being is being is being is being. Nothing is nothing. They're different. Yet they're utterly identical, and they're not defined against one another. Indeed, their difference is no more than their very immediacy. If you want to know in more detail what distinguishes being from nothing, well, good luck. There is nothing that distinguishes them from Hegel if you take them in their immediacy, because there is nothing to them than their immediacy and their immediate difference. But in their immediate difference, they vanish into one another. So being is being, nothing is nothing, and therein lies an immediate difference. But the point about such immediate difference is that it's a vanishing difference. It's a difference that can't be sustained, that can't sustain itself. And so Hegel really explains this. Whether you think this is the truth is another matter. It's obviously what he thinks is the truth in that paragraph, the into being and nothing. They are absolutely distinct, and yet they are inseparable. Each vanishes into the other. Their truth, therefore, is this movement, a movement, again, in which both are distinct, but by a distinction, a difference which immediately resolves itself, undoes itself. So, now this is important because as we move through the logic, Hegel will derive different kinds of difference. In fact, one of the great things about studying the logic are the many different kinds of difference that he thinks there are. So this is immediate difference. An immediate difference is undefinable difference and also a vanishing difference. When we get to Dasein, we'll have a determinate difference. A difference that doesn't vanish, that's settled. That difference will be between reality and negation. Reality and negation don't vanish into one another. They preserve a certain stability because they are the difference that's constitutive of stability. This is the difference that generates instability, becoming. So reality and negation, now their difference is undermined because each in fact participates in the other sort of surreptitiously. So reality is in fact always in a concealed way negation, and negation is always a concealed reality. But they don't vanish into one another. Then there's another form of difference, which is separateness. So something and other are separate from one another. But they are bound together as other than one another. And we get a paradox. They're both quite separate, other, and yet they're other than. So they're separate and conjoined. But that's a different kind of difference. Then we'll get the difference between essence and quantitative difference is difference again. Difference in essence between seeming and essence is difference because you've got a difference between essence, which has a kind of being, and an illusion, which is just non-being. So how can what's illusory be different from what seems if it's nothing? And if it has a difference as seeming. The mirage isn't there, but you see it, and there is what it is to be mere seeming. And so on and so on and so on. Particularity will be a different kind of difference. So look at that as you're going through the logic. The different kinds of difference that arise. And remember that this difference between being and nothing is immediate difference. Also note that the logic shows that there is in fact no pure being. So all those people who have objected to Hegel and said there's no pure being, Hegel says, yeah, exactly. And how do I know that? I know that by thinking pure being. Not by assuming always already that there is no pure being, but by thinking pure being, and thinking beings vanishing. But equally there's no pure nothing either, because that vanishes too. Being then is minimally becoming. And so what Hegel thinks he's done then is that he's derived the self-undermining of purity, if we can put it that way. The sort of self-impurification of being and nothing has been derived, so Hegel thinks. Think also about the alternative. Let's just say for a moment that you're sitting there and thinking, no, this is all wrong. Being is being is being is being. Nothing is nothing is nothing. They're quite separate. Well, first, why? How come? What justifies your assuming that? But more importantly, from Hegel's point of view, let's see what this commits you to. So if you look at page 84, I think it may be page 60 in the Judgement. Anyway, it's the sort of third paragraph in the first remark. So it's the third paragraph in the first remark. It's towards the end of that paragraph. Is it the third paragraph?
It's the one subtext.
It's the one, yeah, that's right, yeah. So towards the end of that, Hegel says, those who maintain the proposition nothing is just nothing, and even grow heated in its defense, are unaware that in so doing they are subscribing to the abstract pantheism of the Eleatic Parmenides, and also in principle to that of Spinoza. The philosophical view for which being is only being, nothing is only nothing, is a valid principle, merits the name of the system of identity. This abstract identity is the essence of pantheism, and it's not Hegel's thinking. Now that's really interesting, because of course Hegel usually gets charged with being the philosopher of identity, the philosopher of the same. But what he's doing is actually charging his critics here of subscribing to a certain system of identity. And this is really important. So clearly Parmenides would not accept what Hegel's saying here. But Plato really would have difficulties with this too. Even though Plato acknowledges that one can say and think non-being. Nonetheless, forms don't turn into their opposite. Being doesn't prove to be nothing. And Spinoza is mentioned. Spinoza famously as well thinks that substance and the attributes of substance are sheer affirmation. They have no moment of negation within them at all. An idea, I think, that then gets picked up is influential on Deleuze, because it introduces the thought that you could have a difference without negation. What is the difference between the attributes of thought and extension? They don't negate one another, because each is purely affirmative. They don't limit one another, and yet they're different for Spinoza. So Spinoza's substance is self-causing pure being. And Hegel is seeing all of these in a tradition. Now, you mentioned religion earlier. It's interesting, at the beginning of this paragraph, Hegel connects the thoughts he's having with Christianity. I mean, not just with Christianity, I suppose with Judaism as well. With the idea, of course, that being comes from nothing. Yeah, I mean, the system of identity would say, no, nothing comes from nothing, ex nihilo nihilo fit. Because being is being is being, nothing is nothing is nothing. You can't get nothing out of being, and you can't get being out of nothing. No creation story, you're an ancient Greek. Being has always been there, and that's where you are. Whereas for Hegel, Christianity and Judaism, and other religions for that matter too, tell the story of creation from nothing, which is in Vorstellung, in representations, is telling another version of what we just thought here. Okay, bear with me, because I just want to go on with. In fact, what I might do actually, if it's all right with you, just carry on with these thoughts, and then we can begin next time by talking about all of this, rather than because it's getting close to 5:2. Take seriously, despite that remark of Hegel's that that they don't pass over, they've passed over, the idea that each vanishes into the other, and it's not just that there is being ... which vanishes. But being proves to be its own vanishing. This is where the different kind of sentences that Hegel talks about are important. If we were philosophers of judgment, then our judgment would be being, subject, predicate, vanishes. Stable being, and we can say of it that it vanishes. But Hegel's sentences aren't like that. They're speculative sentences, in which the predicate articulates what you are to think by the subject. So being is its own vanishing. It's not that which vanishes, it is its own vanishing. And nothing is its own vanishing. That's why being proves to be becoming. And why you can't say being's a fiction, but nor can you say that being remains being. Being proves to be becoming. Remark 2 has some interesting thoughts about judgment and the difficulty of expressing what Hegel's talking about here in a simple judgment. Because what judgments encourage you to do is say, as Hegel himself says at the beginning of C1 there, pure being and nothing are the same. But you've got to have another judgment and say, oh, well, no, they're not, they're different. But they're the same, they're different. That's as far as judgment can get. What judgment can't think, Hegel says, is the movement that is their vanishing. And so what Hegel's trying to do, and he does it in a way slightly more successfully in that last sentence. The truth is this movement, a movement in which both are distinguishing, but in which the difference resolves itself. See how in that sentence, the kind of character of what you're talking about changes. That's more like what a speculative sentence should be like. Okay, a couple of other points maybe. One, the first paragraph of the opening remark just makes sense, just emphasizes that what Hegel's talking about is pure nothing in its indeterminate simplicity. He says, we could also say non-being if we wanted to, we get the same result. But in fact, what we're dealing with here is not nothing in the form of a relation. So, being and nothing are relationless. Yes, there's one more thought that I think I can probably, maybe two I can get in. One is 99, page 99, which is CUP, there's Di Giovanni, page 75. This is a really... okay, it's after that passage that I read you, where being is not the determinateness that it is. Then you've got another paragraph, and then you've got another one, in light of such recollection. And look at sort of about 10 lines into that. Okay. This is, Hegel's dealing with an objection. I'm not going to go much of the objection is, but he's dealing with the objection. And he says at one point, it's almost as if, okay, no, okay, well, if you really insist, this is what would happen. So, the shortest way is to let such reasoning take its course. And then wait and see what is the nature of its boasted results. That nothing would be the result of such reasoning, and that now the beginning should be made with nothing, as in Chinese philosophy, the famous, need not cause us to lift a finger, but for before we could do so, this nothing would no less have converted itself into being. So that opens up the intriguing thought that although the logic begins with being, it could just easily begin with nothing. You would end up in the same place. Because nothing is no more stable than being is. Nothing vanishes into being through being purely and immediately and sheerly nothing. There was a paper given many, many years ago at a conference in America I went to by Cynthia Willett that was really interesting. And I think it's in that volume edited by Di Giovanni called Essays on Hegel's Logic. And it talks about the shadow logic. And what Willett wanted to say was Hegel's logic is always oriented to being. But what if you had a shadow logic? It was when Derrida was very popular. And it's interesting. It was a really interesting discussion. It got a lot of attention. But what Hegel's suggesting here is that there can't be a shadow logic, because nothing would get you to the same point. Being and nothing both come to becoming. All right. I'm not sure if we've got people outside, but I suppose, out of courtesy, we should stop in case there are. All right. Can you please read over this?